Good evening, and welcome back to Untold Nightmares. Tonight, we're leaving the safety of city streets and venturing deep into Alaska's frozen wilderness, a place where silence can kill and the snow hides more than it reveals. These are not campfire tales or tall trucker stories. These are chilling accounts pulled from highways that swallow travelers whole, cabins buried in storms, and voices that echo where no living soul should be. For generations, locals have whispered about the Dalton Highway, Denali Pass, and the ghost towns left behind in the snow, places where people vanish without a trace, and where those who survive never truly come back the same. Every account you're about to hear has roots in real Alaskan history, testimony, or folklore so persistent it refuses to die. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Untold Nightmares for more true horror stories that crawl under your skin and linger long after the screen goes dark. Now, let's step onto the Dalton Highway, 400 miles of ice and silence, where one trucker learned the road doesn't just take lives. Sometimes it chooses them. The Dalton Highway isn't a road you drive for fun. It's 414 miles of ice and wilderness cutting through the Alaskan interior, built to supply the oil fields up at Prudhoe Bay. Long stretches without fuel stops. No cell service, no real towns, just the occasional maintenance camp. Truckers like me joke about it being the road to nowhere, but the truth is, it's a road that eats people. Take your eyes off the road for a second, or let your rig stall in the wrong stretch during January, and you'll freeze before anyone even notices you're missing. I'd been running loads north for nearly a decade, but that night felt different the second I rolled past Fairbanks and into the real dark. It wasn't just the cold, though the temperature had dipped so low the metal of the cab felt like it was humming. It was the silence. Out there in January, at 2 a.m, the silence feels heavy, like it's pressing against the cab glass, trying to get in. Even the engine noise feels swallowed, muted, like the snow's eating it alive. My name's Ray Hollis. I've seen the Dalton in all its moods. Frozen rivers, black ice, moose lumbering across lanes like they own it. But I'll never forget what happened on that run. I still wake up sweating, dreaming I'm back there with him in the cab, the snow piling higher outside the windshield. It had already been a long haul. I left Anchorage at noon, fought through hours of dull daylight, and by the time the sun dipped behind the ridges, I was deep into the interior. I had one goal: push through as much as I could before dawn, because every hour wasted meant more risk of getting caught in a whiteout. By the time I hit mile marker 120, the world had shrunk to nothing but the tunnel of my headlights. The snow wasn't falling heavy, but it was fine, powdery, drifting in sheets that looked like static on an old TV screen. My CB had been silent since I passed the Yukon checkpoint. My thermos was empty. My eyelids were heavy. I'd cranked the heater as high as it would go, but the cold still gnawed at my boots. That's when I saw him. At first, I thought it was a snowdrift, a darker lump at the shoulder of the road. Then it moved. A man, hunched against the wind, arm raised in the universal sign for hitchhiking. Nobody hitchhikes the Dalton in January. Nobody. I slowed the rig, squinting through the glass. The headlights painted him in harsh white. A man in a parka crusted with frost, hood pulled low, beard thick with ice. He didn't step forward when I stopped. Just stood there, arm still raised, like he'd been waiting for me specifically. My gut twisted. You don't leave people to die out here, not when the nearest shelter could be 50 miles away. But something about the way he held himself made every hair on my arms prickle. I rolled the window an inch. You headed north? My breath fogged in the cab. The man tilted his head. His eyes caught the light just right, and I felt my chest tighten. Too wide, too black, like pupils stretched over the whole iris. Far as you'll take me, he rasped. His voice was hoarse, but steady. Not desperate, not grateful. I swallowed. Climb in. Heat's on. He moved slowly, deliberately, boots crunching on the ice. When he pulled the passenger door shut, the cab filled with the smell of wet wool and something faintly metallic, like a roll of pennies or old blood. We rolled back onto the highway. For miles, the only sound was the low growl of the engine and the squeak of wipers fighting the snow. He sat stiff beside me, hands on his knees, staring straight ahead. You break down? I asked after a long silence. Truck's gone, he said. Gone how? He turned his head just enough for me to see the edge of his cracked lips curl. Gone. That was all he said. Every few minutes I'd glance sideways. His hood shadowed most of his face, but his mouth twitched every so often, like he was chewing on something that wasn't there. Once, I thought I saw his tongue flick against his teeth like he was tasting the air. I gripped the wheel, tighter, knuckles pale. We passed the Yukon River Bridge just before 3 a.m. The planks rattled under the tires, a hollow drumbeat echoing into the night. As we crossed, the CB crackled alive for the first time in hours. Static hissed, then a voice, faint but clear enough to freeze my blood. Ray Hollis. Pull over. Not alone. My hands jerked on the wheel. I stared at the radio, heart hammering. The hitchhiker didn't flinch, didn't even glance at it. You hear that? I whispered. Hear what? His voice was flat. Static swallowed the rest, then cut back to silence. By then, the storm was thickening. My headlights strained against it, the world shrinking smaller and smaller. My gauges began to flicker. First, the radio lights dimmed, then the dash panel blinked. Even the headlights pulsed weakly, throwing shadows that seemed to move wrong. I tapped the panel. Nothing. The stranger finally smiled. Just a small, tight curl of his lips. Road takes what it wants, he murmured. My stomach dropped. 10 more miles and the engine coughed, once, twice. Then it died. The cab fell silent. The only sound was the wind clawing at the frame. We coasted to a stop in the middle of nowhere. I turned the key again. Nothing. Not even a click. My breath fogged white. My pulse hammered. The hitchhiker turned slowly to face me, those dark eyes catching the faint glow. You didn't pick me up, he said softly. I picked you. I froze. My skin crawled. Then I looked in the mirrors. Through the drifting snow, figures stood at the shoulder. Dozens of them, shapes pale against the night, still as stone, watching. The storm pressed against the cab like a living thing. Snow whipped across the windshield in frantic bursts, the flakes so thick they looked like claws scraping the glass. My breath fogged the air, slow and shallow, the silence so heavy it made my ears ring. The hitchhiker hadn't moved. He sat perfectly still, eyes locked on me, lips curved in that faint smile. My fingers trembled on the ignition, but no matter how many times I turned the key, the engine stayed dead. You killed it, I said before I realized the words had left my mouth. He blinked slowly. Road takes what it wants. I wanted to scream at him, to shove him out into the snow, but my body felt locked in place. I forced myself to look back into the mirrors. They were still there. Figures lined both shoulders of the highway, half hidden by the storm, some close enough for the headlights to catch, others barely silhouettes in the swirling dark. None moved, none breathed, just watching. My throat closed. Who are they? The hitchhiker leaned back in his seat, eyes drifting toward the glass. They're waiting. For what? His smile widened. For you. I shoved the gear shift into neutral, my foot slamming the pedal in desperation. Nothing. Not a flicker of life from the engine. Get out, I snapped, my voice breaking. You hear me? Get out of my truck. He tilted his head, studying me like a child watching an insect twitch. Then he leaned forward, and for the first time, I smelled his breath. Cold and wrong, like something pulled from a frozen grave. You pick me up, he whispered. That means you already opened the door. Something thudded against the side of the trailer. Then another. The cab shuddered with the force. I whipped my head toward the mirrors. Shapes were moving now, slow, shambling, but closer. One pressed a pale hand against the side of the rig, dragging its fingers across the frost, leaving streaks like black grease. Jesus Christ, I breathed. The hitchhiker's smile didn't falter. They smell you. I grabbed the door handle. My instincts screamed to run, to abandon the rig, to sprint through the storm until my lungs gave out. But when I yanked at it, the door refused to budge. The lock clicked back down on its own. The hitchhiker tilted his head. Told you. Door's already open, but not for you. The figures pressed closer. The cab creaked as weight shifted against it. A hand slapped the glass hard enough to make it quake. Another scraped nails across the metal. The sound sliced into me, shrill and metallic. My vision blurred. My chest heaved. Why me? The hitchhiker leaned closer, his face inches from mine. Because you're still breathing, I snapped. My fist shot out, connecting with his jaw. His head rocked back, but the smile didn't fade. He didn't even flinch. You can't hit what's already gone, he rasped. The CB radio crackled again. Ray Hollis, don't stop. Keep driving. My head whipped toward it. Static drowned the rest, but the words were enough to slice through the panic. Keep driving. I twisted the ignition one more time, praying. The engine roared to life. My scream burst from my chest as I slammed the rig into gear. The tires squealed, the trailer lurched, and the figures stumbled backward into the storm. For a heartbeat, I thought I was free. Then I looked at the passenger seat. It was empty. The road unspooled ahead, black and endless. The storm swallowed the world outside my tunnel of headlights. My hands shook so bad on the wheel I thought I might lose control. Keep driving, I muttered. Keep driving. Keep... Something moved in the sleeper behind me. The curtain swayed. A shadow shifted. My heart slammed against my ribs. I fumbled for the dash light, but before I could flick it on, a voice rasped inches from my ear. Did you think the door closed? I lost control. The wheel jerked. The rig swerved. The trailer fishtailed. I fought it back, muscles screaming, until the tires bit down again. My breath came in ragged sobs. Get out, I roared, twisting in my seat. The sleeper was empty. The curtain hung still. But the smell lingered, wet wool, metal, and cold rot. The storm thinned hours later. Dawn was a pale smear on the horizon, painting the snow in dull blue. I hadn't stopped driving. I couldn't. Every mile I expected him to speak again, to slide out from the shadows, to laugh in my ear. But the cab stayed silent. By the time I hit Dead Horse, my nerves were shredded. My dispatcher took one look at me and swore I was drunk. My hands shook too bad to sign the paperwork. When I stumbled out of the cab, something caught my eye. The passenger door. Frost streaked the inside of the glass, and traced into the frost, written backward so only I could read it from the driver's seat, were 3 words: "See you soon." The silence in Alaska isn't like silence anywhere else. In the lower 48, even when you think it's quiet, there's always some hum. A plane, a distant car, electricity running through wires. But out in the interior, buried in January snow, the silence isn't absence. It's weight. It presses against you, sinks into your chest, makes you hear your own heartbeat louder than the world outside. Some people call it peaceful. Others call it the white silence. I learned the hard way that it isn't peaceful at all. It was supposed to be a fun trip, a break from the grind of grad school. My best friend Kara had convinced me. One weekend, Meg, just us, Eli, and my cousin Noah. A cabin, some drinks, a stove, a storm. Real Alaskan experience. I'd laughed and agreed. I thought I knew what I was in for. Born and raised in Anchorage, I'd been through plenty of winters. I knew the cold, the dark, the way January days shrink to 6 hours of pale sun. But this wasn't Anchorage. This was 40 miles out of Fairbanks, down a snowmobile trail that wound like a vein through endless spruce forest. The cabin wasn't a lodge, wasn't even a proper rental. It was an old hunting shack, passed around from family to family, the kind of place that had character if you were being polite, or condemned if you weren't. The roof sagged under feet of snow. The generator stuttered and wheezed when Eli finally coaxed it to life. Inside, the stove smoked more into the room than up the chimney. And the silence, even with 4 of us breathing and unpacking, sat heavy, like someone else was in the room, listening. We laughed it off the first night. The storm had already rolled in, battering the cabin walls, snow rattling the windows in hard bursts. We cracked open beers, played cards under the yellow hiss of the propane lantern, and tried to make it feel like camping. For a while, it worked. Kara's laugh was sharp and bright, cutting through the storm. Eli teased Noah about his clumsy shoveling earlier. I stretched out near the stove, soaking in what warmth I could. Then, just past midnight, Kara went quiet. She set her cards down slowly, head tilting toward the door. Her eyes narrowed. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. At first, I thought she meant the storm. The wind was screaming against the logs, snow hissing like sand, but then it came again. 3 sharp knocks against the wood. We froze. "Probably a branch," Eli said too quickly. "Wind's throwing stuff." "That wasn't the wind," Kara whispered. We held our breath. The knocking came again, louder, deliberate. Noah swore, stumbling to his feet. He grabbed the rifle we'd brought, just in case of bears. His hands shook against the stock. Who the hell would be out there? Nobody answered. Nobody could. We all knew the trail was gone, buried under drifts. Even if someone had been stupid enough to come out here, they wouldn't be knocking. They'd be pounding, screaming, begging to be let in before the cold killed them. The knocking stopped. The storm howled on. For a full minute, we sat in silence, every eye on the door. Finally, Eli forced a laugh. "See? Wind. Just the wind." He scooped up his cards again like nothing had happened. But Kara's hand stayed in her lap, fingers pale, nails digging into her palms. She didn't play another round. By morning, the storm had eased, leaving the world outside buried in white. Snow swallowed the cabin up to the windowsills. The trail we'd ridden in on was gone, erased. We tried to act normal. Eli and Noah spent hours digging a path to the generator shed, swearing at the way drifts filled it faster than they could clear. Kara and I worked inside, boiling snow for water, trying to make the stove draw better smoke. But every time I glanced at the door, my chest tightened. The memory of those knocks echoed louder than the storm. That night, it came back. We were sitting around the lantern again, half asleep from a dinner of canned chili, when the first sound came. Not knocking this time. Scratching. Long, slow drags of something hard across the wood. We froze. Kara's spoon clattered against the bowl. Noah's knuckles whitened on the rifle. The sound came again, moving higher up the door. Scrape, scrape. My stomach lurched. "It's an animal," I whispered, though my voice betrayed me. "In 20 below?" Noah hissed. "You ever seen a bear in January? That's not a bear." "Could be a wolf," Eli offered weakly. But when I pressed my eye to the frost-edged window, I saw them. Footprints. In the snow leading up to the door. Not boots, not paws, bare feet. I stumbled back, my throat closing. "Someone's out there." Noah swore again, raising the rifle. Kara clamped her hands over her ears as the scratching grew louder, sharper, faster. Then it stopped. The silence pressed in heavier than before, thicker, like the air itself was holding its breath. We didn't sleep that night. The next day, Eli insisted we check. If it was a person, they're either frozen out there or gone. Either way, we can't just sit. Noah and I followed him out, rifles slung, boots crunching through drifts. The cold bit so deep my teeth ached. Sunlight glittered off the snow, too bright, too sharp. The footprints were still there, dozens of them, circling the cabin, crisscrossing like a dance. Bare feet pressed into powder, toes splayed, heels sharp. No drag marks, no stumbles, just perfect prints, as if whoever made them didn't feel the cold at all. We followed them a few yards into the trees. Then they stopped. Not trailed off, not buried. Stopped. One last print, toes pressed deep as if someone had stepped down, and then vanished. Eli's face drained white. Nope, we're done. He turned back fast, trudging hard toward the cabin. Noah and I followed without a word. That night we barred the door with furniture. But around midnight, the knocking came again, this time from the window. The sound of knuckles against glass is wrong in a way I can't describe. A door. You expect. A door has thickness, strength. You can tell yourself someone's outside and you're inside. But glass is thin, fragile. When something knocks against it, you realize how little separates you from whatever wants in. The first rap froze us where we sat. The propane lantern flickered, shadows twitching across the cabin walls. Noah raised the rifle automatically, his lips pressed so tight they'd gone white. Eli whispered, "It's the wind. It's the wind." But his voice cracked halfway through. Then the knocking came again. 3 steady taps, deliberate. Kara whimpered. I don't remember standing, but suddenly I was at the window, breath fogging the frost. My palms sweating against the wood frame. My eyes strained past my reflection into the night. At first, I saw nothing but snow swirling in the lantern glow. Then the wind eased for half a second, and I saw them. Hands. Pale hands, too pale for the dark. Fingers pressed flat against the glass. Nails long, yellow, dragging down, slow enough to squeal. I screamed, stumbling back, colliding with the table. The lantern rattled, flame flaring. Noah fired a shot through the wall before anyone could stop him. The rifle blast deafened us in the small space, plaster splintering where the bullet tore through. When the ringing in my ears faded, the hands were gone. But the prints remained. 5 long smears of frost clung to the glass, like fingers that had melted the ice where they touched. Nobody slept again. We sat huddled around the stove, jumpy at every creak of the logs, every gust against the roof. The storm built back up toward dawn, wind screaming hard enough the cabin shook. I thought maybe, the storm would drive whatever it was away. It didn't. By morning we found prints again. More this time, circling the cabin, some pressed up against the walls themselves, as if dozens of bodies had leaned in through the night listening. The worst were the ones on the roof, bare feet stamped into snow that hadn't been there when we went to bed. Kara broke down sobbing when Eli pointed them out. She wrapped herself in her blanket, rocking, whispering over and over, "It's not real. It's not real. It's not real." By noon, the generator coughed and died. Eli spent an hour in the shed, pulling cords, cursing, trying to restart it. When he came back inside, his face was as pale as Kara's. "The gas is gone," he said. "What do you mean, gone?" Noah snapped. "Gone," Eli repeated. "Cans are empty. I filled them myself yesterday, I know I did. But they're empty now, bone dry." The silence that followed was worse than the storm. "Maybe you—" I started. "I didn't spill it, Megan." Eli's voice cracked. "I didn't. Somebody—" He stopped. His eyes flicked to the window. Nobody argued. The cold crept in by evening. We layered on every scrap of clothing we had, pulled sleeping bags tight, kept the stove burning hot with what wood was left. Still, frost edged the walls, crystals forming around the nails. Our breath hung thick in the air, each exhale fogging like smoke. The scratching returned at midnight. Not from the door this time. From the roof, it dragged back and forth, heavy, deliberate, like something crawling across the shingles. Kara buried her head in my lap, sobbing. Eli gripped a chair like he'd smash it against the ceiling. Noah whispered curses over and over like prayers. Then the knocking started again. Not on the window. Inside. 3 raps from the wall behind us. We scattered. Noah swung the rifle, firing blind into the boards. Splinters flew, smoke filled the air, the recoil nearly dropping him. But the sound kept coming. Not frantic, not random. 3 slow knocks, moving. 1 wall, then the next, then behind us. Like whatever it was had slipped through, circling inside the wood itself. Kara screamed. Eli dragged her toward the stove, holding her tight, whispering it would be okay, though his own teeth chattered. I pressed my back to the door, nails digging into the wood, as if I could hold it shut, even though the knocks weren't coming from there anymore. My chest heaved. My heart raced so hard I thought it might burst. Then silence fell again. But it wasn't the heavy silence of the white silence. It was worse. It was expectant, as if the knocking had been a question, and it was waiting for us to answer. When dawn came, the windows were frosted solid. We scraped them with knives, but the ice was thick, unnatural, like glass poured over with frozen milk. No light filtered through. We couldn't see out anymore. "We have to leave," Noah said, his voice hoarse. "We can't sit here waiting for it to come through. We'll follow the tree line south, find the road." "In this storm?" I asked. "Better than here," he snapped. Kara shook her head violently, clutching Eli's arm. "If we go out there, it'll take us. That's what it wants. It wants us outside." I wanted to argue, but when I glanced at the door, I froze. Frost had spread across the wood in spiderweb patterns, and written in the frost, clear as carved glass, were words, "Let us in." We didn't leave. We couldn't. Noah raged, pacing, threatening to walk out alone. Eli talked him down, his voice breaking, sweat freezing on his brow despite the cold. Kara wouldn't move from the stove, her eyes fixed on the door, whispering, "Don't read it. Don't look at it. Don't answer." But the words kept reforming. Every time the frost melted by the stove, they came back, carved fresh in ice. By the 3rd night, Kara cracked. I woke to find her standing at the door, blanket falling from her shoulders, her hand on the latch. Her eyes were open, but they didn't look like hers anymore. Frost rimed her lashes, her lips pale blue. "No," I whispered, lunging, grabbing her arm. "Kara, don't." She turned, and her breath clouded the air. "They're cold. They need in." Her voice wasn't hers. It was too many voices at once, layered, echoing. I screamed for Eli. He tore her back from the door. Noah aimed the rifle, shouting he'd shoot if she touched it again. The storm howled outside, and faintly through the walls, dozens of voices whispered in unison, "Let us in." That was the last night any of us slept. By dawn, Kara was burning with fever, her skin blue where it touched the air. Eli refused to let go of her, rocking her against him, his face streaked with frozen tears. Noah sat in the corner, rifle across his lap, muttering that if she opened the door, he'd put a bullet through her head before they could take her. I sat by the stove, staring at the frost-covered windows, waiting for the next knock. It never came. Instead, the walls began to creak, slow, steady, like something pressing against them from outside. The logs bowed inward. Frost spread in spirals across the wood. The whole cabin shuddered. Eli screamed, clutching Kara tighter. Noah raised the rifle. I covered my ears as the voices rose again, not whispers this time, but shouts, hundreds of them, shaking the air. "Let us in." The wall split. Snow blasted through, filling the cabin in seconds. Shapes poured with it, pale bodies, bare feet, hands reaching, eyes empty and wide. Kara stopped screaming. Eli's cry cut short. Noah fired until the chamber clicked empty. The last thing I remember was the cold hitting my skin, so deep and sharp it felt like knives. Hands closing around me, pulling me into the white. Then nothing. They found the cabin weeks later. Rangers said it was buried nearly to the roof. No footprints, no trail. Just a stove still smoldering, and 4 sets of clothes piled neatly near the door. Nobody ever found our bodies. And in Fairbanks, when the wind cuts just right, people still swear they hear knocking against their windows. People in coastal Alaska say the Bering Sea doesn't give back what it takes. Sometimes it's men. Sometimes it's boats. Sometimes, if you believe the older folks in the fishing villages, it takes whole families. Jonas Hale had lived with that truth for 52 years. The sea had raised him, paid him, nearly killed him more times than he could count. And 2 winters back, it had taken his wife. Her name was Lorna. She was tougher than any man on the docks, ran a skiff like she'd been born to it. One storm, one rogue wave, and she was gone. They never recovered her body. Just a pair of her gloves, red wool, bloated with seawater, washed up 20 miles down the coast. Jonas had buried the gloves in a cedar box, because that was all he had to bury. Since then, he told himself he wouldn't let the sea take anything else from him. But the sea never listens. It was January, the kind of cold that cracks metal and burns skin. Jonas was out before dawn with his daughter Sarah and his oldest friend Thomas Reed. Their boat wasn't much, a 40-footer named Lorna May after the woman Jonas had lost. But it had kept them alive these last 2 years. Sarah was only 17, still in high school, but she'd begged to come along on the winter runs. Jonas had resisted at first, but she wouldn't stop. In the end, he gave in, because the truth was, he needed her. She was steady, strong, with her mother's same quick hands on the ropes. That morning, as they hauled the first nets, snow stung their cheeks, and the wind howled off the gray water. Thomas smoked as always, his eyes fixed on the horizon like he was reading something Jonas couldn't see. The sea had carved Thomas into a statue of scars and smoke, a man who didn't spook easy. But when Jonas dragged the net up and dumped it on the deck, even Thomas frowned. The fish weren't right. Half the cod were split open down the middle like claws had raked through their sides. Their eyes bulged, their jaws hung slack, and their skin carried strange marks like bruises in shapes Jonas didn't recognize. Sarah gagged. "Dad, what is that? Sharks?" Jonas shook his head, though he wanted to believe it. "Could be. Maybe." Tomas crouched low, his cigarette hanging from his lip. He nudged one of the fish with a calloused finger. Its body bent in ways it shouldn't have. "Not sharks," he said flatly. "What then?" Sarah asked. Thomas spat into the water. "Don't want to know." The next haul was worse. When Jonas pulled the net, his gut knotted before it even cleared the surface. The weight dragged wrong. The lines trembled, like something alive was pulling from below. When the catch spilled onto the deck, Sarah screamed. Some of the fish weren't fish at all. They had limbs, pale gray limbs with long fingers fused into webbing, mouths stretched wide, studded with needle teeth, eyes black, lidless, staring. Sarah stumbled back, hand clamped over her mouth. "Oh my God." One of the things twitched. Jonas saw it. A faint twitch of its hand, the smallest tremor in its chest. He stomped down hard with his boot until bone cracked. Sarah turned away, sobbing. "Dad, what is that? What is it?" Jonas didn't answer. He couldn't. The sea was restless. The water slapped against the hull like it wanted to get in. The wind had died down, but the silence that followed was worse. Sarah leaned against the rail, shivering, tears streaking her cheeks. Thomas lit another cigarette with shaking hands. That was when the singing began. At first, Jonas thought it was the wind moaning through the rigging, but the sound grew sharper, clearer. A voice, a woman's voice, high, aching, beautiful. Jonas's throat closed. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, because the voice wasn't just beautiful, it was familiar. It was Lorna. He knew it couldn't be, but his heart betrayed him. The melody wound around him, tugged at memories buried so deep he'd thought they were gone. Her laugh in the kitchen, her hand brushing his on the wheel, her face that last morning, telling him to stay on shore, that she'd be fine. Now she was singing to him. From the sea. Sarah clutched his arm, her eyes wide, wet with tears. "Dad, do you hear that?" Jonas tried to swallow, but his throat was too tight. Yeah, I hear it. She sounds like Mom." Thomas dropped his cigarette into the sea. His face was hard, but his voice shook. "Don't listen. Whatever it is, don't you dare listen. That ain't your wife." But Jonas couldn't stop. The voice was everywhere now, curling inside his skull, sweet and sharp. Lorna's voice, calling him. The nets jerked again. Hard. Jonas snapped back as the lines went taut, dragging the boat sideways. Water sloshed across the deck. Sarah screamed, grabbing the rail. Thomas cursed, throwing his weight into the ropes. Jonas joined him, muscles burning as they fought to keep the catch from pulling them under. Then, for one impossible second, the surface broke. Jonas saw her. Lorna. Her face, pale and perfect. Her hair streamed like dark seaweed, eyes black as the abyss. She smiled at him, lips parting as if to speak. Her hand broke the surface, reaching for him. "Lorna!" Jonas roared, reaching back before he even knew what he was doing. Thomas lunged, grabbing his arm. "It's not her." But Jonas saw only his wife, her smile, her hand, the woman he'd buried only in memory. And all around her, faces began to rise. Dozens, pale, distorted, some with mouths too wide, some with limbs too long. All of them staring, black eyes fixed on the boat. The singing swelled, so loud it drowned the sea itself. Sarah screamed, "Dad, don't let go." The rope burned against Jonas's palm. He didn't know if he could hold on. The rope burned his palms raw, the coarse fibers biting deep as the nets jerked again. Water sprayed, freezing instantly on their jackets, turning the deck slick as glass. Jonas staggered, boots sliding, but he held on. He couldn't let go. Not when she was right there. His wife, smiling, reaching, singing his name. But then Sarah screamed, and that sound cut sharper than the rope. "Dad, don't let go." He turned. His daughter's face, her mother's eyes, her lips trembling with fear, were staring at him, begging. His hand shook. For a heartbeat, Jonas stood suspended between two worlds, the one he'd lost and the one he had left. The sea chose for him. The net jerked again, harder, nearly yanking him off his feet. Thomas cursed, muscles straining as he hauled back, with everything left in him. "Cut the damn line." Jonas blinked, dazed. His wife's face was still there, beautiful and wrong, lips parting as the song grew sharper, twisting inside his skull. "Jonas," she whispered. "Come home." Thomas shoved him, hard, breaking the spell. Jonas stumbled, shaking his head like he could rattle the sound out. He grabbed the knife from his belt, slashed down. The rope parted with a snap. The net vanished, sucked beneath the black waves. The singing cut off. For a long moment, the only sound was Jonas's ragged breathing, Sarah's sobs, and the groan of the boat as it righted itself. Jonas dropped the knife. His hands shook so hard he could barely open them. He looked at Sarah. She was crying openly, terrified, but alive. And Thomas was watching him like a man who wasn't sure his friend hadn't just tried to kill them all. Jonas couldn't meet his eyes. The storm worsened. The sea heaved, throwing the boat high, then dropping it like a toy. They wrestled through the night, soaked to the bone, every wave threatening to swallow them whole. But nothing was worse than the silence, because the singing hadn't left. It lingered in Jonas's ears, faint, sweet, relentless. Every time the wind lulled, he swore he heard it again, just under the surface. Lorna's voice, calling. By dawn, Thomas's face was gray. his cigarette stash gone, his hands trembling. Sarah was curled under her mother's jacket, eyes red, lips blue. Jonas stood at the wheel, staring at the endless horizon, barely holding on. That was when the second voice joined. Not one this time. Many. Low, humming, weaving together like a choir. Men, women, children. Dozens of voices, all rising from the sea. The sound made Jonas's stomach turn, because he knew some of those voices. He knew Lorna's. But he also knew others. Men from the village. Fishermen who had gone out and never come back. Thomas heard it too. His hands clenched the rail so tight his knuckles split. "Don't listen," he whispered. "Don't you dare listen." But Sarah's face had gone slack, her eyes glassy, fixed on the waves. "Mom," she whispered. Jonas's heart lurched. "No," he said, grabbing her shoulder. "No, Sarah, it's not her. Don't listen." But Sarah was already rising. The first wave hit broadside. The boat tipped hard, throwing them all to the deck. Jonas slammed against the wheel, stars bursting in his vision. When he staggered up, Sarah was at the rail, arms out, eyes locked on the sea. "Sarah." Her lips moved. He couldn't hear her words over the roar, but he knew. He knew she was calling for her mother. He lunged, grabbing her waist just as another wave broke over the bow. Freezing water swallowed them, dragging Sarah halfway over. She screamed, thrashing, clawing toward the water. Jonas hauled back, muscles tearing, heart breaking. "No, she's gone, Sarah." Sarah turned on him, eyes wide, face twisted with fury. "She's not gone. She's right there, Dad." The sea boiled. Pale faces broke the surface all around, mouths open in song. Hands reached, long and thin, clawing the air. Jonas's blood ran cold. Tomas barreled forward, grabbing Sarah's arms, helping drag her back. Together they wrestled her to the deck, pinning her thrashing body. She screamed, sobbed, begged, her voice raw. Mom, please, don't leave me." Jonas's chest split. His daughter's cries sounded exactly like his own heart. And through it all, the singing swelled. Voices wrapping around them, whispering promises he wanted so badly to believe. They tied Sarah to the mast. It broke Jonas's soul, but there was no choice. She fought like a wild thing, then sobbed until she had no breath left. Thomas leaned against the rail, shaking, eyes bloodshot. "We have to head back," he rasped, "before it takes all of us." Jonas nodded, numb. He turned the wheel south, praying the engine would hold, praying they'd see the shoreline again. But the sea wasn't done. By nightfall, the singing was inside the boat. It echoed in the hull, vibrated through the steel, seeped into their bones. Jonas pressed his hands to his ears until they bled, but it didn't matter. He still heard Lorna. "Jonas, why are you keeping me from her?" His hands shook on the wheel. He turned, and for a second he swore he saw her standing on deck. Lorna, dripping wet, pale, her red gloves bright against her skin. She smiled. Behind him, Sarah screamed his name. He spun back, and the wheel was empty. The sea rose up. They found him clutching the mast. That's what the Coast Guard said later, when they found the Lorna May drifting days later, half submerged. The boat was empty except for Jonas. Thomas was gone. Sarah was gone. Jonas himself was alive but broken. His hair white, his hands blistered, his eyes staring at nothing. When they pried him off the mast, he kept muttering the same thing over and over. She wanted her back. The sea wanted her back. He never explained. He never fished again. He never spoke Sarah's name again. And in the village, when the storm comes in hard from the bearing, people say you can still hear her. A girl's voice calling for her mother. A man's voice calling his wife. A chorus calling from the deep. The sea doesn't give back what it takes. And for Jonas Hale, it had taken everything. If you've never stood beside the Trans-Alaska pipeline at night, it's hard to understand how small it makes you feel. 800 miles of steel stretching across mountains, rivers, and endless tundra. Up close, it hums. A low vibration you can feel through your boots, as though the whole state is alive, breathing. But when the sun is gone and the lights around the pump stations throw long shadows on the snow, it doesn't feel alive. It feels haunted. Matt Riker had been a pipeline guard for 3 years, but nothing prepared him for Pump Station 9. The old hands warned him about it during orientation, but he'd laughed. They told him the same thing everyone heard eventually. There's someone out there on the line. Tall. Too tall. Always just past the floodlights. You'll see him if you're lucky. You'll hear him if you're not. Matt had shrugged it off. He'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan, walked patrols through places where every alley could hide an ambush. A little steel tube in the Alaskan wilderness wasn't going to scare him. He figured the guys were just messing with the new hire. That was before the first knock. It was late January, a night so cold the air froze in his nostrils the second he stepped outside. The thermometer on the wall read -26. Matt zipped his parka up to his chin, pulled his balaclava tight, and swung onto the catwalk that ran along the pipeline. His snowmobile sat below, idling softly, exhaust puffing white against the night. His breath fogged in the beam of his flashlight as he walked the length of steel. The sound of his boots on the grating was loud in the silence. Out here, you got used to silence. No birds, no traffic, no people. Just the wind and the hum of the pipe. He was halfway down the stretch when he heard it. Knock, knock, knock. He stopped. It wasn't the groan of metal shifting in the cold. He knew that sound, had heard it 100 times. This was deliberate. 3 slow raps against the pipe, echoing into the night. Matt swung his flashlight across the tundra. Nothing. Just white snow and black tree line. He pressed a gloved hand to the pipe. It was trembling. Then he heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it came from further down, as if whatever was making it was moving away from him. His chest tightened. He told himself it was just ice cracking, the metal settling. He told himself a lot of things, but none of them explained the footsteps. Crunch, 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 soft, steady, pacing him from the snow below. Matt froze, light cutting through the dark. No one. Nothing. The footsteps stopped when he stopped. When he moved again, they followed. He didn't tell anyone that first night. He figured it was his mind playing tricks, fatigue, the cold, the loneliness. But the next night, it happened again, and again after that. Sometimes it was the knocks. Sometimes it was the footsteps. Once, when the fog rolled in thick, he swore he saw a figure standing just beyond the floodlights. Tall, hunched, its head cocked as though it was listening. When he raised his rifle, it melted into the dark. By the end of his second week at Pump Station 9, Matt was jumpy, his nerves strung tight as wire. He hadn't slept more than an hour at a time. The pipeline groaned, the lights buzzed, and in every shadow, he thought he saw something move. Then Cody disappeared. Cody was 19, a kid from Anchorage working security to save for college. He had a baby face, cracked dumb jokes to break the silence. Matt liked him. Everyone did. One night, Cody went out on patrol and didn't come back. They found his snowmobile still idling beside the line, headlight throwing a pale beam into the fog. His rifle was still strapped to the sled. The only tracks in the snow were his boots, leading north along the pipeline, step after step, in a straight line. And then they just stopped. The company flew in search crews. Helicopters swept the valley for 2 days. Nothing. No body, no sign of struggle. Just a 19-year-old kid swallowed whole by the Alaskan night. Official report said disorientation, hypothermia. Cody panicked, wandered into the tundra, died of exposure. That was the story the suits told the families. But the men at Pump Station 9 knew better. They'd all heard the knocks. 2 nights after Cody vanished, Matt was making his rounds when he saw the eyes. At first, he thought it was an animal. Wolves, maybe, lingering at the tree line. But wolves don't stand upright. Wolves don't hover 8 feet off the ground. The eyes glowed faint yellow-green, reflecting the floodlights. They didn't blink. They just stared. Matt gripped his rifle, heart pounding, and called out, "Who's there?" The eyes didn't move. He raised the barrel. His breath fogged in the freezing air. The safety clicked off. And then, as if amused, the eyes sank down into the snow and vanished. After that, it got worse. The radio crackled with static during patrols. Twice, Matt heard his name hissed through the interference. Matt. Low, drawn out, almost a laugh. Once, while checking a valve, he pressed his ear to the pipe and swore he heard something moving inside. A scrape, a shuffle, like hands dragging along the steel. That night, he dreamed of the knocks. He woke up drenched in sweat, convinced someone had been standing at the foot of his bunk, watching. He wasn't the only one. The other guards stopped laughing. They spoke in hushed tones, avoided eye contact. Everyone looked over their shoulders too often. Pump Station 9 had gone from a job site to a prison. The breaking point came a week later. It was 2 a.m., the coldest night yet. Matt's breath hung like smoke as he walked the line, his flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The air was dead still, too still. Then the pipe vibrated. Not a groan, not a shift, a pulse. He pressed his hand to the steel. It thrummed beneath his palm, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. And then, echoing up the length of the line, came the knock. Knock, knock, knock. He spun, light slashing across the snow. Empty. Another knock further down. Then another closer. The sound moved along the pipeline, circling him fast. Matt staggered back, rifle raised. "Show yourself." And the laughter came. Low at first, then rising, echoing through the steel, vibrating into his bones. Not human. Too deep, too long, too hungry. Matt's light shook as he swept it across the tundra. And there, just beyond the glow, the eyes. Dozens of them. High, too high, staring from the dark. And when he blinked, they were gone. The laughter echoed through the pipe long after the eyes vanished. Matt stood frozen on the catwalk, his breath coming in ragged bursts, the rifle trembling in his grip. Every instinct told him to run, but where could he go? There was nothing for 80 miles in either direction but snow, steel, and silence. When he finally forced his legs to move, he made it back to the station in a blind sprint, boots clanging, lungs burning. The other guards were in the common room, playing cards half-heartedly, their eyes heavy. When Matt stumbled in, pale and shaking, they all went quiet. "You saw it," one of them said softly. Matt didn't answer. He didn't need to. Over the next few nights, the station turned into a tomb. The men avoided the windows after dark. They spoke in whispers. No one wanted to go out alone, but the patrols had to be done. The company monitored every hour by radio, and if they missed a check-in, it meant fines, investigations, lost jobs. So they kept going out, and the knocks kept following them. One guard, Simmons, swore he'd heard someone climbing the catwalk behind him. Boots on metal, getting closer and closer, until he spun around and saw nothing. Another said he'd seen handprints on the snowmobile seat when he came back to it. Too big to be human, pressed into the frost like claws. Matt barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he dreamed of Cody's tracks, walking straight into the night and stopping dead. Sometimes, in the dream, he followed them. Sometimes he saw where they led. A mouth. Wide, black, opening beneath the snow. 2 weeks later, the first body turned up. It wasn't Cody. This one was a welder from the maintenance crew. They found him half a mile north, sprawled beside the pipe. No blood, no wounds. His parka was gone, his boots missing. His skin was frozen stiff, mouth open in a silent scream. The strangest thing was his eyes. They were wide open but glazed with frost. The pupils weren't human anymore. They were vertical slits, like a wolf's. The company swept the body away by helicopter before the guards could say much. But everyone saw. Everyone knew. That night, the laughter came again, louder, closer, and it said Matt's name. He stopped pretending he wasn't afraid. He stopped telling himself it was the cold, the dark, the stress. Something was out there, something using the pipeline to hunt them. On his next patrol, he took 2 men with him, Simmons and Alvarez. They moved in silence, flashlights cutting arcs across the snow. Halfway down the stretch, the pipe trembled under their boots. Knock, knock, knock. God damn it, Alvarez hissed, swinging his light. Where? The knocks came again, this time closer, moving. Simmons raised his rifle, hands shaking. It's in the pipe. No, Matt whispered. His breath fogged white. His stomach turned as the realization sank in. It's using the pipe. The steel hummed underfoot. The sound rolled like a drumbeat circling them. And then it stopped. Silence. Matt swallowed hard, sweat freezing on his brow. We're heading back. Now. They turned. And froze. At the edge of the light stood a figure. Tall. Too tall. Its head brushed the bottom of the pipeline, shoulders hunched, arms dangling long enough to scrape the snow. Its face was wrong. Stretched, gray, with eyes that burned yellow-green in the dark. It didn't move. Neither did they. Then slowly, impossibly, it smiled. Simmons broke first. He fired. The rifle cracked, the muzzle flash lighting the tundra. The figure didn't flinch. The round tore through it like smoke. And then it stepped forward. The ground shook under its weight. Its arms uncoiled, fingers long and thin, each ending in something too sharp to be nails. The smile widened, teeth glinting wet. Run! Matt shouted. They bolted, boots hammering the catwalk. The thing followed, not running, not rushing, just walking. Each step was too long, too easy. It was playing with them. Simmons screamed. Alvarez shouted his name. Matt didn't look back. He didn't dare. By the time they reached the station, Simmons was gone. The company sealed the site within days. They claimed a mechanical accident, ordered all crews south, but Matt knew better. He didn't quit. He couldn't. He needed to know what it was, needed to know why it wanted him. So he stayed behind, volunteering for one last week of solo patrols. That was when the voices changed. No more laughter. Whispers now. Inside the pipe. He pressed his ear to the steel one night, desperate, shaking. And what he heard nearly stopped his heart. Dozens of voices. Men, women, children, all whispering at once. Cold. Hungry. Matt. His blood ran cold. He staggered back, bile rising. They were inside. The final night came with a storm. Snow whipped across the tundra, winds howling hard enough to rattle the scaffolding. Matt made his last patrol, rifle slung, flashlight dim in the blizzard. He told himself he'd quit tomorrow. He'd leave Alaska, leave the pipeline, never look back. The knocks started halfway through the stretch. Knock, knock, knock. Matt froze. They came again, louder, closer. And then, for the first time, the voice wasn't in the pipe. It was behind him. Matt. He turned slowly, snow stinging his eyes. The figure was there, not at the edge of the lights this time, right there on the catwalk. It towered over him, head bent to avoid the pipe, eyes burning like lanterns. Its breath reeked of iron and rot. Matt raised the rifle with shaking hands, fired. The bullet passed through. The thing leaned closer, its smile so wide it split its face. And then it whispered, so soft he felt it more than heard it. You're mine now. They never found Matt Riker. When the relief crew arrived a week later, his snowmobile was still idling at the base of the catwalk. His rifle was strapped to the sled. His boots were lined up neatly beside the pipe. The only tracks in the snow led north, past the lights, and then they just stopped. Alaska has a way of stripping men of their pride. You can carve highways through the tundra, fish its endless seas, even run oil across its frozen veins. But when you stand on Denali, all of that feels like nothing. The mountain doesn't care who you are or how many peaks you've bagged. It takes when it wants, and no one can stop it. At over 20,000 feet, Denali is the tallest mountain in North America, and one of the deadliest. Avalanches wipe out whole teams. Frostbite turns flesh to stone. Some climbers collapse from thin air and never wake up. The guides in Talkeetna don't even bother with pep talks. They tell you straight. Every year, the mountain keeps some of you. Logan Pierce thought he was ready for that truth. He was 27, strong, lean, and hungry. He'd climbed Rainier, Hood, and Kilimanjaro. He had a few sponsorships lined up and more ambition than experience. He wanted Denali on his record badly. It wasn't just another mountain. It was American soil, untamed and brutal. Conquering it would mean something. That spring, he joined a 4-person team. 2 guides, Victor Hale and Harlan Pike, both seasoned Alaskans with weathered faces and quiet voices. Another climber, Rachel Ng from Seattle, wiry and sharp-eyed. And him. The plan was simple enough. Ascend via the West Buttress, move to Camp 4 above 18,000 feet, cross Denali Pass, and push for the summit if the weather gave them a window. Everyone knew the risks. Everyone knew the stories. Locals called Denali Pass cursed. Over 100 climbers had died there, their bodies frozen where they fell. Sometimes search crews found them, sometimes not. And sometimes guides whispered they found something else, figures on the ridge who looked alive until you got close. Logan didn't believe in curses. Not yet. Base camp was nothing like Everest had been. No bustling campsites, no tourists snapping photos in brand new parkas. Just wind, snow, and men who barely spoke. Logan tried making jokes the first night, but nobody laughed. The air was thin and sharp, and all anyone cared about was double-checking knots and watching the sky. Victor and Harlan weren't the type to tell ghost stories, but on the second night when the wind rattled the tents, Logan overheard them talking low. "You ever hear them?" Victor asked. "Don't start," Harlan muttered. "I heard them once," Victor went on. "On the pass, voices in the storm, calling like they knew my name." "Shut up," Victor's voice dropped. "Didn't say I was joking." Logan lay awake long after, staring at the tent ceiling, wondering if they were hazing him. They made steady progress, pushing higher each day, carrying loads to caches, and returning, climbing, high and sleeping low, like the guides drilled into them. The mountain stretched white and endless in every direction. The cold was a living thing. Every breath burned. Every gust of wind clawed through down and fleece. By the 3rd week, they reached Camp 4. Their tents flapped like dying birds in the wind, and the sky churned with storm clouds. Above them loomed Denali Pass, the gateway to the summit, and the graveyard of the unlucky. That night, Logan couldn't sleep. The altitude gnawed at him, pounding behind his eyes. His hands and feet tingled with pins and needles. He lay in his bag, listening to the fabric groan in the wind. That was when he heard them. Voices. At first he thought it was Harlan and Victor outside, checking ropes. But the words didn't fit. Too many at once. Overlapping. Male, female, deep, high. Whispers carried on the gale. He sat up, heart thudding. "Rachel, you hear that?" Rachel's headlamp clicked on in the dark. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. "Yeah." Victor stirred, muttering, "Go back to sleep." But the voices grew louder. Logan crawled to the tent flap and unzipped it. Snow sprayed his face, stinging like glass. He squinted into the whiteout and froze. Through the blowing snow, he saw figures moving, at least 6 of them, roped together, swaying against the wind. Their parkas looked wrong, old, faded, torn in places. They trudged, as if half buried, heads bowed, mouths moving in silent screams. One stopped, slowly turned. Its eyes were hollow sockets rimmed with frost. It looked straight at him. Logan fell back inside, fumbling with the zipper. His hand shook so badly he nearly ripped it. There's people out there." Victor's face went hard. "Don't look at them. Don't talk to them." "What the hell was that?" Logan demanded, his chest heaving. "The pass," Elias said softly, pulling his bag tighter. His eyes gleamed in the dim lantern light. "The dead don't leave Denali Pass." Morning brought sunlight like nothing had happened. The storm broke, painting the snowfields gold. The mountains stretched forever, glittering and indifferent. Logan tried to laugh it off. Stress, hypoxia, hallucination, anything but what he'd seen. But Rachel wouldn't stop staring at him as they packed up. "We both saw it," she whispered. "Don't pretend we didn't." Logan said nothing. His throat was too dry. They pushed up toward the pass. Every step was agony, each breath thin and wheezing. The rope team moved in silence, ice axes biting into the slope. The ridge ahead loomed like the edge of the world. By dusk, they pitched tents just below the pass. The air was brittle, the cold sinking into bone. Logan lay in his bag, shivering, eyes wide. He couldn't shake the hollow stare of the figure he'd seen. And just after midnight, the voices came back. They started as whispers, curling through the storm. Then grew louder, pleading, moaning. Some called names, and one of them called his, Logan. His blood froze. He sat up, ears straining. "Logan, come with us." Rachel stirred beside him, face pale in the lantern light. "They said your name." Logan's heart hammered. He wanted to deny it, but he'd heard it clear as day. Outside, footsteps crunched in the snow. Not one set. Dozens. The tent walls shivered as shadows passed across them. Too many, moving too close. Harlan hissed, "Don't open it. Don't you dare open it." But Logan's blood ran cold as a shadow stopped right outside his flap. A hand pressed against the fabric, fingers outlined in frost. And then a voice, hollow and thin, whispered from just inches away. "You won't make it down. None of you do." The voices didn't fade with the dawn. By morning, Logan's eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling from exhaustion. None of them had slept. Shadows had pressed against the fabric of their tent all night, whispering, pacing, sometimes clawing faintly at the seams. When the sun rose, the snow was pristine. No tracks, no sign anyone had been there, but all 4 of them knew. Something was waiting. Victor broke camp without a word. Harlan muttered prayers under his breath. Rachel wouldn't look at Logan, as if afraid she'd see something in him she didn't want to. Logan felt hollow, as if the voice that had called his name had taken something from him. They climbed into Denali Pass that afternoon. The ridge was a knife edge of snow and ice, with sheer drops yawning on either side. Wind cut through every layer of clothing, freezing sweat to ice. The rope tugged at Logan's harness. He tried to focus on his steps, one at a time. Ice axe, crampon, breathe. But every few seconds he swore he heard another set of steps behind him, not in rhythm with the team. Too many, too close. Once, he risked a glance over his shoulder. There was no one there. And yet, just for a split second, he thought he saw a line of climbers stretching back into the storm. Their ropes weren't tied to anything. Their faces were gray, eyes black sockets. When he blinked, they were gone. By nightfall, they reached the far side of the pass and set camp in the thin air. The summit loomed above, glittering cruelly in the moonlight. They huddled inside the tent, silent. No one spoke of the voices, but no one could stop listening for them either. The wind screamed outside. The nylon walls rattled. And then, clear as a bell, a voice whispered right between them. "Rachel." She flinched. Her hands clawed at her hood, shaking her head. "No. No, no. No." Logan's blood froze. He reached for her, but she shoved him back, eyes wild. "They know my name," she whispered, her voice breaking. Victor grabbed her shoulders. "Ignore it. Do you hear me? It feeds on fear. You give it nothing." But Rachel's eyes rolled, and tears froze on her cheeks. "It's inside. It's already inside." That night, Logan dreamed of the pass. He was standing on the ridge, roped to Rachel, Victor, and Harlan. But when he looked back, the rope didn't end with them. It stretched back through the storm, tied to hundreds of others. Frozen faces, torn parkas, mouths moving, all of them connected to him. One by one, they leaned forward, dragging him down. When he woke, his hands were clenched so hard his nails had drawn blood through his gloves, and Rachel's sleeping bag was empty. They found her 50 yards from camp, barefoot in the snow. Her boots were lined up neatly beside the trail. Her parka was folded. Her body was frozen stiff, her face twisted into a smile that didn't belong to her. Victor cursed and turned away. Harlan muttered more prayers. Logan just stared. He couldn't stop. The way her eyes were wide open, glazed white with frost, they looked exactly like the hollow sockets he'd seen in the storm. They wrapped her in a tarp, but they all knew she wasn't really gone. Not here. Not on this mountain. The voices followed them as they climbed lower, trying to retreat. Always just behind, always whispering. Sometimes Logan thought he heard Rachel's voice among them. Sometimes he thought he heard his own. 2 days later, the storm trapped them in another camp. The wind howled like the dead were shrieking right outside. Victor finally broke. He stood, grabbed his axe, and shouted into the storm, "You want me? Come take me." The tent walls bulged inward, as if something massive pressed against them. Fingers dragged across the fabric, long and deliberate. Then a sharp rip split the seam, snow blasted in, and a gray hand, black nails crusted with ice, reached inside. Victor swung his axe. The hand withdrew, but the laughter that followed shook the air, rattling the ground beneath them. When they dared crawl outside, Victor was gone. No tracks, no blood, just emptiness. The rope that had tied him to them was frayed clean through. Now there were 3. Harlan was breaking down. His face was gray, lips cracked. He mumbled scripture until his voice bled into sobs. Logan wanted to scream at him, but he didn't have the energy. His bones felt hollow, his breath shallow. Every step felt borrowed. That night, as he drifted half asleep, he felt someone sit beside him. A weight pressed the snow down. He opened his eyes and saw Rachel. Her lips were blue. Frost clung to her eyelashes. She smiled. "It's easier if you stop fighting," she whispered. "Come with us." Logan sat up, shaking his head violently. "You're dead." Her smile didn't waver. "So will you be." When he blinked, she was gone, but her outline remained in the snow, pressed deep as if something had been sitting there all night. By the 6th day, Harlan couldn't take it anymore. He unhooked himself from the rope, stared out at the ridge, and whispered, "I see them." "Don't," Logan rasped, grabbing at him. "Don't look." But Harlan stepped forward. The storm swallowed him whole. Logan never saw him again. Now there were 2, Logan and the mountain. He staggered down the ridge, snow crunching beneath his boots. His vision blurred. His body screamed for rest. The voices never stopped. Sometimes pleading, sometimes mocking, sometimes chanting his name. When he reached the edge of the pass, he collapsed to his knees. The rope trailed behind him, frayed and torn. His gloves were frozen stiff, his breath shallow, and that was when he saw them. Hundreds of figures standing in the snow, all the lost climbers, all the ones who never came down. Rachel among them, Victor, Harlan, and Cody. The one who'd vanished years ago, his face still fresh, his parka still bright, as if he'd died only yesterday. They stood in silence, eyes hollow, mouths moving. The snow fell heavier. The wind howled louder. And Logan realized he couldn't hear his own heartbeat anymore. When rescuers reached Denali Pass weeks later, they found a collapsed tent, shredded by wind. They found ropes cut clean through. They found boots lined up neatly in the snow. But they never found Logan Pierce. The only thing left was his journal, frozen stiff inside his pack. The last words scrawled in shaking handwriting. The mountain doesn't keep bodies. It keeps souls. Alaska is filled with ghost towns. They don't always look like the dusty, sun-bleached places in Western movies. Out here, they're buried under snow, hidden in valleys, swallowed by mountains. Mining camps that lived and died with the veins of coal or gold. Towns where people once raised families, drank in bars, and prayed in churches, only to abandon it all when the ground betrayed them. Black Hollow was one of those places. Most Alaskans hadn't heard of it in decades. The name lived only in barroom whispers and a few old newspaper clippings. Officially, it was abandoned in 1943 after a collapse killed over 40 miners in a single night. Their bodies were never recovered. The company sealed the shaft and pulled out, leaving everything behind. But locals said the real reason no one went back was stranger than that. They said the men down there never stopped working. Marcus Hansen had a bad habit of chasing stories like that. At 29, he'd grown tired of the routine life of a mechanic in Anchorage. He liked scaring himself. Haunted houses, backcountry treks, urban legends. So when a drunk old-timer at a dive bar muttered about Black Hollow, Marcus latched on like it was destiny. 2 of his friends got dragged in. Devin Cross, 30 years old, an EMT who usually knew better, but trusted Marcus too much. And Owen McAllister, 33, a newly divorced welder, who said yes because he didn't have much else going for him. The plan was simple. Load up 2 snowmobiles with gear, head north into the mountains, find the ghost town, crash in the ruins for a night, and come back with a good story. They never came back. The trip took 6 hours. Snow blew sideways across the ridges. The machines whined and rattled over drifts. By the time they rolled into the valley where Black Hollow sat, all 3 men were stiff with cold. The town appeared suddenly, a cluster of dark shapes against the white slope. Buildings sagged under the weight of decades of storms. Roofs bowed. Windows shattered. Rusted carts sat frozen on narrow tracks. A tangle of beams marked the company store, and above it all, the mine entrance gaped like a black wound. Marcus cut his engine and pulled off his helmet. The silence was crushing. No birds, no animals. Just the faint whistle of wind through broken timbers. Owen squinted at the mine. Place feels wrong already. Devin chuckled, though his voice shook. Every ghost town feels wrong. But Marcus stood staring, his breath curling white. The darkness inside the shaft didn't move with the wind. It was thick, heavy, alive. They set camp in a bunkhouse. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges. Inside, rows of cots lined the walls, frames bent, mattresses rotted. The men kicked snow off the floor and cleared a space near the rusting iron stove. They strung lanterns, cracked open beers, and tried to shake the cold. By nightfall, the valley was buried in silence. That was when they heard it. At first, Marcus thought it was just wind through beams, but the rhythm was wrong. Clang, clang, clang. Metal striking stone. Slow, steady. Devin froze mid-sip. Please tell me that's not what I think it is. Owen's eyes darted toward the floor. Picks. That's picks. The sound came again. Louder. Clang, clang, clang. From deep underground. Marcus's skin prickled. The mine's been closed 50 years. No one argued. Around midnight, Devin swore he saw lantern light through the cracked window, a faint orange glow bobbing near the mine entrance. He yanked Marcus and Owen over to look. Sure enough, 3 figures shuffled across the yard, shoulders hunched, helmets low. Their coats looked heavy, old-fashioned, caked in frost. They carried lanterns that swayed, their glow too dim to reach far. None of them spoke. They walked toward the shaft in silence. Then one stopped, turned, and even from the bunkhouse, Marcus could see it didn't have a face, just a hollow cavity, black as the mine itself framed by frost. The lanterns winked out. Darkness swallowed the yard. Marcus barely slept. He lay on the cot, frozen stiff, every creak making his heart stutter. At some point, he swore he heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy boots dragging, slow, patient. He held his breath until the sound passed. When dawn came, the door was half buried by snow, but fresh boot tracks led away from it. Dozens, marching toward the shaft. Not theirs. They should have left. Devin begged to. Owen agreed, but Marcus couldn't. He pulled out his camcorder, the kind that still recorded to tape, and clutched it like a weapon. If we film this, we can prove it. People need to see. Owen cursed under his breath, but he followed. They trudged into the shaft just after noon. The air turned bitter cold. The darkness felt heavier than night. Their flashlights cut weak beams through damp stone. The timbers creaked overhead like the groan of old bones. Half a mile in, the tunnel split. That's where they saw it. A pickaxe, still embedded in the wall. Rusted, yes, but fresh dust scattered at its base as if someone had swung it hours ago. Devin whispered, "That's not possible." Marcus raised the camcorder, zooming in, his breath ragged. It's like they never stopped. And that's when the sound came again. Clang, clang, clang. Not faint, not distant. Ahead, just yards ahead, followed by the shuffle of boots and voices, low, wordless, dozens of them, the dead men of Black Hollow, still working the night shift. The clangs grew louder. Marcus gripped his camcorder with white-knuckled hands, the beam from his flashlight trembling against the damp tunnel walls. Devin raised his own light, sweeping the shaft ahead. Owen stood in the middle, frozen in place. Clang, clang, clang. Then the shuffle of boots. Marcus swallowed hard. Somebody's still here. Owen snapped his head toward him. No, nobody's here. Nobody alive. The sound came again, closer now. Boots dragging, striking stone. Voices low and muffled, like men talking with lungs full of coal dust. Devin whispered, "We need to go. Now." But Marcus lifted the camcorder, filming down the black throat of the tunnel. His breath came in gasps. "If we leave now, no one will believe us. Just 1 minute. One more minute." Owen cursed under his breath, but none of them moved forward. They stood shoulder to shoulder, staring into the dark as the noises crept closer. And then they saw it, a faint orange glow bobbing down the tunnel. One lantern, then another, then a dozen. Figures shambled into view, men in tattered coats, helmets strapped crooked, eyes hidden under shadows. Their skin was pale and caked in soot. Some had holes where faces should be, just hollow black caverns rimmed with frost. Others had mouths stretched wide, opening and closing soundlessly, as if still trying to breathe the air they'd lost 50 years ago. Each carried a pickaxe. Each swung in slow rhythm. Clang, clang, clang. The tunnel echoed with the endless labor of the dead. Devin choked back a cry. Holy God. The miners didn't look up. They just worked step by step, swinging and striking. Marcus raised the camcorder higher, his voice shaking. "Do you see this? Do you see this?" One of the miners stopped. Its head turned toward him. The lantern's glow hid its face, or what was left of it. Flesh torn away, eye sockets empty, teeth gritted black. Coal dust smeared across skin like tar. The camcorder slipped in Marcus's hand. The figure tilted its head. Then every single miner stopped and turned. The sound of picks ceased. Silence flooded the tunnel. Hundreds of hollow eyes locked on the three men. Owen broke first. He screamed and shoved past Marcus, bolting back down the shaft. Devin ran after him, panic in his voice. "Move! Move!" Marcus stumbled behind them, his light jerking across the walls. His camcorder swung wildly, still recording. Bootsteps thundered after them. Not just one set, dozens, hundreds. The tunnel shook with the weight of the dead. Lanterns flared behind them, casting long shadows that chased at their heels. "Faster!" Owen bellowed. The shaft narrowed. Timbers cracked overhead. Marcus's lungs burned, his legs screaming. But the miners were gaining. Their boots dragged but never slowed. Their voices grew louder, a low, endless chant. Not words, just sound. The noise of men who never stopped working. They burst into daylight, snow blinding after the tunnel's dark. The three men staggered into the yard, collapsing in the snow. Their breath came ragged and steaming. For a moment, the silence returned. Then the sound followed. Clang, clang, clang. Lantern lights flickered at the mouth of the mine, dozens of them. The figures filled the opening, staring out with hollow eyes. None crossed the threshold, but none turned away. Marcus lifted the camcorder with shaking hands. He zoomed in, filming every second. They're real. My God, they're real. Owen slapped the camcorder from his hands, his face twisted in panic. "Screw the tape. We're leaving." Devin's voice cracked. "Now. Right now." They scrambled to the bunkhouse, grabbed what gear they could, and staggered toward the snowmobiles. The engines roared, sputtering in the cold. As they gunned across the valley, Marcus dared one last look back. The miners still stood in the shaft, lanterns glowing, watching. They didn't speak for the first hour of the ride back. The only sound was the howl of the engines, the whine of skis over snow. Then Owen cut his throttle, signaling the others to stop. They rolled to a halt on a ridge, steam hissing from the machines. Owen yanked off his helmet, face wild. "We don't tell anyone." Devin stared at him. "What are you talking about? People need to know." "No," Owen hissed. His eyes darted around the empty tundra. "That's what it wants. That's why it let us out. To spread it. To drag more people in." Marcus shook his head, pulling the camcorder from his pack. "I've got it all on tape. Proof." Owen stepped closer, eyes burning. "Destroy it. Burn it. Or we're next." Marcus clutched the camcorder tighter. "You're insane." That's when they heard it. Clang, clang, clang. All three froze. The sound drifted up the valley. Not faint, not distant, close. Devin whispered, "That's impossible." But the echoes grew louder. Clang, clang, clang. The ridge beneath them trembled. Snow shifted. And then lantern light flickered between the trees. They bolted back onto the snowmobiles. Engines screamed, tracks spitting snow. But the clangs kept pace, echoing from everywhere at once. Behind them, beside them, even beneath them. Devin screamed over the engine. "It's following us." Marcus clutched the camcorder tight, filming over his shoulder. Lanterns bobbed in the distance, dozens of them, weaving through the trees. Figures moved between the trunks, impossibly fast, closing the gap. Owen shouted, "Don't stop, don't ever stop." By nightfall, they reached a frozen river. The snowmobiles sputtered as they crossed, skis clattering on ice. Marcus's machine coughed, then died midstream. "No, no, no," he cried, yanking at the pull cord. Devin circled back, shouting, "Get on mine." But before Marcus could move, the ice cracked. A fissure split beneath him with a thunderous crack. Lantern light glowed from the black water below. Hands shot up, gray, frostbitten, clawing hands. Marcus screamed as they gripped his legs, dragging him toward the hole. The camcorder tumbled into the snow, still recording. Owen leapt from his machine, grabbing Marcus's arms. "Pull!" Devin clutched his other side, screaming. The three men strained, but the hands kept pulling, stronger than death, stronger than gravity. Marcus's eyes went wide. He choked on a sob. "Don't let go." The ice gave way. The hands yanked harder. Marcus vanished into the dark with a final scream, the hole sealed with a groan of shifting ice. Silence. Devin collapsed to his knees, sobbing. Owen staggered back, staring at the black water. His face was hollow, pale. The camcorder lay in the snow, lens cracked, tape still rolling. Devin picked it up, clutching it like a lifeline. "We have to leave, now." Owen didn't answer. He just stared into the distance. And faintly, from beneath the ice, the clang began again. Clang, clang, clang. Weeks later, a search party found a snowmobile abandoned on the riverbank. A single helmet lay beside it. No bodies, no tracks. Just a frozen camcorder in the snow. When the tape was played, it ended with Marcus's scream, and the hollow chant of hundreds of voices, swinging picks in unison. The miners of Black Hollow, still working their eternal shift. Alaska has places so far removed from the rest of the world that they might as well be another planet. Not the cities tourists flock to, not the tidy towns that scrape by on fishing or oil, but the forgotten ones. Cabins nailed together from driftwood and tin, a scattering of smoke in the endless white. Places where silence is heavier than the snowdrifts, where even the dogs seem too afraid to bark. One of those places was called Nuvik. You won't find it on any modern map. At the turn of the millennium, no more than 60 people lived there, huddled on the northern coast near the black churn of the Chukchi Sea. A few dozen cabins leaned into each other as though trying not to be blown away by the wind. The people stayed because their families always had, because there was nowhere else to go. But when outsiders spoke of Nuvik, and rarely anyone did, they lowered their voices. They said children went missing. They said nights were not safe. Daniel Harker came to Nuvik in the winter of 1999. He wasn't a hunter or a trader. He was a 34-year-old freelance writer from Minneapolis, the kind who lived on assignments that paid just enough to get him to the next one. His editor had wanted numbers and statistics. How many families were leaving the bush? How many schools had shuttered? But Daniel wanted stories with teeth. He wanted something that would stick in the mind. In Kotzebue, over bad coffee and worse whiskey, he heard a fisherman mention Nuvik. He spoke of a village no one wanted to enter, a place where people vanished, where the snow carried voices that weren't living. Daniel wrote the name down. That was all it took. The bush pilot who flew him in was a man named Frank. He didn't say much, but his eyes kept darting to the horizon as though he wanted to turn back. When the skis screeched against the frozen strip and the plane rolled to a stop, Frank leaned close as Daniel unbuckled. His breath smelled of tobacco and nerves. "Stay inside after dark," he muttered. "I'm not coming back for 3 weeks. You be alive when I do." Then the man shoved the throttle forward, and the plane was gone, leaving Daniel alone on the ice. The roar of the engine faded, swallowed by the wind. The village lay a quarter-mile ahead. Crooked roofs hunched under heavy snow. As Daniel trudged toward it with his pack, eyes followed him. Faces half hidden behind curtains, shadows moving quick inside doorways. A little boy pointed, said something sharp in Inupiaq, and his mother yanked him inside. By the time Daniel reached the cluster of cabins, every door was shut tight. The headman found him first. Jonas Kunik was old enough that the lines in his face looked carved, his eyes pale as frost. He met Daniel in a low wooden hall that smelled of smoke and seal oil. Daniel explained who he was, fumbling for words in the cold. Jonas listened without expression, then finally said, "You'll stay in the empty cabin by the point. You'll keep your door shut when the sun falls. Night does not belong to us here." He said nothing more. The cabin was drafty, patched with tin. A rusted stove coughed when Daniel fed it driftwood, popping like it might give out at any second. He set his lantern on the table, unpacked his notebooks, and tried to ignore the way the darkness pressed against the single window like a physical weight. That first night he wrote page after page, describing the emptiness of the place, the way no one smiled, the way even the sled dog seemed cowed. Outside, the wind rose until it howled like something alive, and then sometime past midnight, the silence shifted. Papa, let me in." The voice was small, trembling, muffled through the door. Daniel froze. The pen slid from his hand. He leaned forward, convinced he'd misheard. "Papa, I'm cold, please." Every muscle in his body locked. His hand hovered over the latch, heart pounding. But he had no children. He had never been a father. The voice whimpered. Then fingernails began to drag down the wood, long, slow scratches that set his teeth on edge. Daniel stumbled back, whispering, No, it's not real." He pressed his fist to his ears. The scratching stopped. Footsteps crunched away into the snow. He didn't sleep. Morning came gray and bitter. Daniel stumbled into the heart of the village, eyes sunken. He caught a young woman drawing water from a frozen barrel. Her name, she told him, was Mira Agluk. He asked lightly, too lightly, if children here played tricks. Her bucket slipped from her hands, ice clattering across the ground, her face drained of color. "You heard them," she whispered. "The night callers." She said the words like a curse. In a trembling voice, Mira explained, "They weren't children, not anymore. They came after dark, crying for parents, begging to be let inside. And if you answered, if you opened the door, you were gone. The snow would cover your tracks. The village would speak your name in past tense." Daniel wrote it all down, though his hand shook as he did. That night, the wind screamed harder against the cabin walls. The knock rattled the door on its hinges. "Papa, let me in." Another voice, this one a girl sobbing. "Mama, I'm scared." Daniel pressed himself against the wall, lantern light flickering across his pale face. Then, "Daniel." His blood iced over. "Daniel, it's your mother. Open the door." His mother had been dead 12 years. The lantern guttered. Black frost crept across the window pane, branching like veins. More voices swelled outside, whispering, pleading, crying. Some spoke English. Others spoke Inupiaq. A few spoke in voices Daniel recognized, names of friends long gone, classmates from school, neighbors he hadn't seen in decades. The walls rattled with fists. Nails scraped glass until cracks spidered through it. Daniel dropped to the floor, clutching his notebook to his chest, rocking, whispering prayers he hadn't spoken since he was a boy. The voices grew louder, closer. They knew his name. Morning came without light. The sun had vanished behind walls of storm, leaving only a dull gray glow that looked more like dusk than day. Daniel sat hunched by the stove, still clutching his notebook, eyes bloodshot from a night without sleep. His hands trembled so badly the pen rolled out of his fingers. When he finally stepped outside, the village looked wrong. No smoke from half the chimneys. Doors shut tight, curtains pulled close. Even the sled dogs, usually a racket of yelps and chains, were silent. Mira Agluk found him in the lane. She grabbed his arm hard enough to bruise. "You heard them again, didn't you?" Daniel nodded. Her eyes filled with a helpless kind of pity. "They know your name now. They'll never stop." He wanted to argue, to laugh it off, but his throat closed. He hadn't told anyone about the voice of his mother. Yet Mira spoke as if she already knew. Inside the hall, Jonas Kunik was waiting. The old headman's face was carved with grief. Around him, a few villagers whispered in Inupiaq, their voices sharp and afraid. Jonas raised a hand. Silence fell. 2 cabins stood empty this morning, he said. The Akalik family, the Anugas, doors locked from the inside, no tracks outside. Mira made the sign of the cross. Someone muttered a prayer. Daniel forced himself to ask, "What do you mean empty? Where did they go?" Jonas's pale eyes fixed on him. Gone. Like the others. Taken. The old man's gaze hardened. "You should never have come here, outsider. The callers know your voice now. You've fed them." Daniel bristled. "I didn't open the door. I didn't answer." "You listened." Jonas cut him off. "That is enough." The hall erupted in whispers. Daniel stumbled back, heat rising in his chest. For the first time since arriving, he realized the villagers weren't just afraid of the callers. They were afraid of him. That night, the storm worsened. Wind screamed through the gaps in the cabins. Frost formed black webs across the windows, pulsing as though alive. Daniel sat with his lantern, every nerve stretched thin. He tried to write, to capture the sounds, but his hand wouldn't obey. The pen scratched nonsense lines. Then came the first voice. "Daniel, it's me. Let me in." A friend from childhood. Kevin, who died in a car crash when they were 17. Another voice followed. His old neighbor from Minneapolis, cheerful, familiar. "Danny boy, open the door. It's freezing out here." Then dozens, all at once. Men, women, children, all speaking over one another. Pleading, crying, calling his name. The cabin walls shook. Nails screeched across the glass until it cracked in spider webs. The lantern guttered. The frost thickened until the room went dark. Daniel clamped his hands over his ears, but the voices were inside his head now, a chorus whispering from the marrow of his bones. "Let us in. We're so cold. You belong to us now." By morning, he staggered into the hall, wild-eyed, clutching his recorder. He shoved it into Jonas's hands, playing back the night's terror. The tape hissed with static. Then faintly, unmistakably, the voices rose. Jonas snapped it off, fury flashing in his pale eyes. "You fool!" he spat. "You brought them inside with this." Daniel snatched it back. "The world needs to know. People need to hear." "The world will not believe," Jonas hissed, "and now they will never stop." That day, more cabins emptied. Families vanished as though they had never existed. Blankets still warm on beds, lamps still burning. But no people. The remaining villagers gathered, their faces hollow. Some argued to leave, to flee into the tundra. Others said running only led the callers to follow. Jonas silenced them all. "We endure," he said flatly, "or we vanish." Daniel couldn't take it. He stormed back to his cabin, slamming the door. His notes scattered across the floor, pages filled with shaky handwriting. Each line looked more frantic than the last. "They know me. They know everything I've ever loved. They won't stop." That night, the callers didn't knock. They didn't cry or whisper from the door. They were inside. Daniel woke to the sound of breathing in the corner. Slow. Wet. He fumbled for the lantern, its glow spilling weak light across the room. A shape stood in the far corner. It looked like a child at first. Then its head tilted, and the face was all wrong. Hollow sockets, teeth too long, skin pale and stretched thin like ice over black water. "Papa," it whispered, voice distorted. Daniel scrambled back, knocking over his chair. The thing stepped forward, feet crunching on frost that now spread across the floorboards. More shapes appeared in the shadows. Dozens. Children, women, men, faces familiar and not. All whispering his name. "Daniel, Daniel, Daniel." The lantern sputtered. Darkness swallowed the room. When the storm broke 2 days later, the village was silent. A search party from Kotzebue arrived weeks after. They found Nuvik deserted, cabins empty, doors locked from the inside. No footprints in the snow. Only one thing remained. On a table in the cabin by the point sat Daniel's recorder, still spinning. The tape hissed with static, then caught the faint sound of voices, a chorus of whispers, rising and rising until they blurred together, and then Daniel's own voice joined them. After that, silence. Alaska has places so brutal and so far removed that they don't feel like part of this world. Aurora Station was one of them. From the air, it looked like nothing. 4 steel buildings chained together by narrow covered walkways, bolted deep into the permafrost of a plateau above the Brooks Range. No roads led there. The nearest settlement was nearly 200 miles south. Nothing but tundra and white desert in between. The wind never stopped. It screamed across the plateau as if the sky was trying to tear the station from the earth. At night, the aurora bled green and violet curtains over the blackness, shifting like ghosts. It was a place built for numbers, weather readings, geological samples, government contracts. Not for people, not for survival. In November of 2004, 11 researchers arrived to spend the winter at Aurora Station. 11 names typed neatly into rosters. Elias Granger, climatologist. June Hallbrook, radio operator. Connor Briggs, mechanic. Dr. Raymond Keller, the station lead. Lydia Frost, the youngest technician. Mason Doyle, medic. Professor Helen Varga, senior geologist. Along with cooks, assistants and techs whose lives seemed small enough to vanish in the snow. By spring, only one of them would be alive to tell what happened. The storm came first. It swept in without warning, hammering the buildings with a roar that never ceased. For 6 days straight, snow slashed across the windows until every pane showed nothing but white static. The walls trembled like the hull of a ship. The generators whined and rattled. Heaters coughed. Condensation streamed down the metal beams. Inside, the crew did what they could to keep sane. June Hallbrook taped a cardboard sign above the mess table that said, "Welcome to the End of the World Cafe." She tried to make jokes over the radio static, tried to call Anchorage until her own voice seemed to vanish into endless hiss. Lydia Frost set up her laptop for movie nights, but the wind was louder than the dialogue, and the screen flickered when the power dipped. Connor Briggs swore at the generators, calling them stubborn old mules that wouldn't pull their weight. They laughed, but only at first. By the 4th night, laughter was gone. The lights flickered, and then for 6 long seconds the entire station was black. In that silence, every single one of them swore they heard boots walking slowly down the hall. When the power returned, nothing was there. 2 days later, Lydia Frost vanished. She'd walked from the comms room toward her bunk. When June went to check on her, an hour later, the bed was empty. Lydia's parka still hung on the rack by the door. Her boots were lined neatly beneath it. On her desk lay her notebook, the last line trailing off mid-sentence. "It's in the frost." They tore the station apart, checked every corridor, every storage bay, every airlock. The hatches were sealed. The snow outside was untouched. No footprints, no drag marks, nothing. Lydia Frost was simply gone. That was when the windows began to change. Not the delicate lace of ordinary frost. Not the thin crystals that melt in the light. This was black. Thick veins crawling across the inside of the glass like rot spreading under skin. The more they scraped it away, the faster it returned. By dawn, every window was veined again, pulsing faintly as though alive. The voices followed. At first it was just knocks. A slow rapping on the steel doors. Then bootsteps crunching across the outside walkways when no one was there. Then whispers, faint but distinct, sliding through the walls. One night, Elias Granger froze in his bunk because he heard himself outside the airlock. "Let me in," the voice pleaded. "I'm freezing out here." When he rushed to the hatch, it was sealed tight. June swore her headset whispered her name, though the radio wasn't connected. Connor insisted he saw a man standing by the satellite dish in the middle of a whiteout. A man who didn't move, though the wind screamed hard enough to strip skin. Dr. Keller slammed his fist on the mess table. Stress, cabin fever, hallucinations. We've studied the symptoms. Stay focused. But no one slept easy after that. On the 10th day, Professor Helen Varga was found in the corridor. She lay on her back, eyes wide, her skin rimed with frost, her mouth frozen open in a silent scream. The hallway was heated, but her body was frozen stiff. On the wall beside her, traced into a sheet of ice that hadn't been there hours before, were words none of them admitted to carving. "We are already inside. Panic hit like fever." Mason Doyle argued they should barricade the comms room. June begged to call for an airlift, though she knew no pilot would fly through the storm. Connor muttered about taking the snowmobiles south, but even he admitted they'd never survive 100 miles in the blizzard. So they stayed, and waiting meant listening to footsteps each night. Waiting meant hearing their own names whispered in the dark. Waiting meant watching the black frost creep higher on the walls. That night, Elias sat hunched in his cabin, scribbling words with a hand that shook so hard the ink bled into blotches. It's not outside. It's not the storm. It's us. The more we hear it, the more it knows. It's learning our names, our memories. It's already wearing us. He shut the book and never opened it again. By day 12, the crew swore they saw doubles in the halls. Elias glimpsed June, standing motionless in the mess, while June's voice still chattered in the comms room. Connor caught sight of himself at the end of the corridor, his face pale, his eyes black, staring at him before vanishing. Every time they tried to confront the doubles, they dissolved into shadow. That morning, Jonas the cook calmly walked into the main airlock without a coat, no boots, no gloves. He opened the hatch and stepped into the white without hesitation. By the time anyone reached the door, he was gone. 2 hours later, Dr. Keller followed. The rest of them watched helplessly, knowing it was only a matter of time. Elias pressed his forehead against the frost-veined glass, staring at the dark branches crawling upward, pulsing like veins. His breath fogged the pain. And that was when he understood. The frost wasn't outside trying to get in. It was already inside them. Morning came without light. The sun had vanished behind walls of storm, leaving only a dim gray glow that looked more like dusk than day. The generators rumbled weakly. Lights flickered, and the corridors dripped with condensation that smelled faintly of metal and mold. Elias Granger sat in the mess, head in his hands, listening to June argue with Mason in a low, furious hiss. "They're not coming for us," June snapped. "No plane, no convoy. You know that." "We don't leave the station," Mason shot back. "If we run into the storm, we die faster." "We're dying anyway," Connor muttered from the corner. His hands shook as he cleaned a wrench that didn't need cleaning. His eyes darted from face to face, never still for more than a second. Elias stared at the table, at the grain of scratches cut into the steel. His reflection in the surface rippled strangely, as though the light itself was bending. For a moment, he swore another face hovered beneath his own. The same shape, the same eyes, but black where his should be white. He blinked. It was gone. That night the whispers began earlier. Usually they came after midnight, when exhaustion made them doubt themselves. But this time the voices came while they were still in the mess, pretending to eat. "June," a voice sang softly from the corridor. "June, come outside." She dropped her spoon, her face draining of color. "Don't listen," Mason warned. Another voice followed, higher, trembling. "Mason has helped me." Elias felt the hair rise on his neck. It was Lydia's voice. Lydia Frost, gone nearly a week now. Connor pushed his chair back so hard it screeched against the floor. "That's enough. I'm done listening to this." He stormed down the hall toward the sound. "Connor!" June cried, but it was too late. They chased him to the airlock. The inner door was open. The outer hatch gaped wide to the storm. Snow whipped in, stinging their faces, coating the steel floor. Connor's boots sat neatly by the door. His coat still hung on the rack, but he was gone. That night, none of them slept. They sat together in the comms room, lanterns burning, radios hissing. The storm howled outside, rattling the siding like bones in a drum. Every so often, a voice whispered from the static. Names, pleas, cries. Elias tried to record it, but the tape only hissed. At some point, he drifted half asleep against the wall. He dreamed he was walking the corridor, lantern in hand. Black frost crawled up the walls in branching veins, pulsing faintly like arteries. Shapes pressed against the glass, faces pale and wide-eyed, mouths moving soundlessly. When he woke, his lantern was still in his lap, but the walls around him were wet with frost, black, branching, alive. The days bled together. The food tasted of metal. The water stank. The walls groaned under the weight of snow. June began to hum constantly under her breath, tuneless and ragged, as if drowning out something only she could hear. Mason stopped sleeping entirely, pacing the halls with a crowbar in his hand. Elias caught him once staring at June like she was an intruder, eyes bloodshot and wild. One night, Elias woke to find Mason standing over him, crowbar raised. "Mason," Elias whispered. The man's eyes glistened black. For a heartbeat, Elias thought it wasn't him at all, just a shell wearing his shape. Then Mason blinked, staggered, dropped the crowbar. His eyes cleared. He stammered something about not sleeping, about hearing voices in Elias's breath, before collapsing against the wall in silent sobs. They were unraveling. On the 15th day of the storm, June broke. Elias found her in the hallway, pressing her face against the frost-covered glass. She was whispering to it, her breath fogging the black patterns as though they were listening. "What are you saying?" Elias asked carefully. "They're cold," she murmured. "They want warmth. They just want us to open the door." Her lips brushed the glass. Frost crept higher, branching across her skin. Elias yanked her back, and the frost retreated, but her cheek was rimed with black crystals that didn't melt. June didn't speak again for the rest of the day. By the 18th day, Mason vanished. Elias woke to find the crowbar abandoned on the floor, the airlock doors both sealed. No boots missing, no coats gone. It was as though Mason had dissolved into the walls. Only Elias and June remained. She sat motionless in the mess, lips moving soundlessly, eyes glazed. Elias tried to rouse her, but she only whispered one thing, over and over. "They're already inside." That night, Elias locked himself in his cabin. He wedged a chair against the door, turned up the lantern, pressed his recorder against his lips. "This is Elias Granger," he whispered into the static. "Aurora Station is lost. They're not outside. They're here. They wear our names. They wear our faces. They'll walk us into the storm, one by one, until nothing is left." Outside his door, bootsteps paused. Then his own voice whispered, "Elias, let me in." He shut his eyes. He didn't move. The knob turned slowly against the chair. Metal groaned. "Elias, we're cold, we're so cold." The lantern flickered. The frost crept across the glass, black veins pulsing, inching toward his shadow. Morning never came. The storm swallowed time until days and nights blurred together. Elias stumbled through corridors that smelled of rot and rust, rooms webbed with black frost that writhed when he looked too long. Sometimes he glimpsed June walking ahead, her hair trailing frost, her eyes empty. Other times he saw Mason, or Lydia, or faces he couldn't name at all. He stopped writing. He stopped eating. He stopped trusting the walls not to breathe. At last, silence fell. Elias staggered into the comms room and found June slumped in a chair, eyes wide, skin as pale as snow. She was rimed with frost from head to toe, frozen in place like a statue. Her lips were parted as if she'd been whispering still. The frost on the walls pulsed faintly, black veins glowing with something deeper than ice. Elias set his recorder on the table, his voice ragged, breaking. "If anyone finds this, don't come here. Don't answer the voices, don't—" A chorus swelled behind him. Every name, every voice, his mother, his sister, his own voice among them. The recorder hissed, then clicked. Weeks later, a supply team arrived. Aurora Station stood silent, doors sealed, windows black with frost. They forced their way inside and found nothing. Bunks empty. Coats still hung neatly by the doors. No footprints. No bodies. In the comms room, on the table sat a recorder. The tape spun. The last sound it captured was Elias Granger's voice, ragged and trembling, joining the chorus of whispers. And then silence.